a book online that's a compilation of stories that were in the New Yorker magazine.
It's already off.
There was a great story about a lady.
It
was like a scientist.
When I was looking at it, it just said...
And the story, the
went right
writer
straight
went
to
with her
voicemail.
like
I'm having trouble with this phone.
any dead animal.
The real nice thing, I used to
I'm going to turn it
come
off.
around judge houses, and I came around, gave out the trophies.
Edible for her lab animals.
I didn't know about that.
Or
Yeah, years ago, I don't know.
know.
This had to be in the 50s.
And she was fascinating.
I thought I see some
What she knew. They were on
Someone called me. I think they said
whatever Chattahoochee River, whatever it was in Florida.
I know. I see
She was
something I read trying to find all this stuff.
I still have our trophies.
She is looking for water moccasins.
I'm going to give them to you for your show display case down at the rail car.
I was scared to death. But she was so like calm about it, relaxed about it. And I guess a lot of the snakes are in the trees as you flow down the river, so they're always like.
When it comes
But
to
she's swollen, don't worry, the water moccasins.
Good evening. It's 7 o'clock. I'd like to call to order the Kent City Council Committee meeting of February the 7th. First up is Committee of the Whole. Chairman, Mr. Fiala, that's me. Melanie is sick. She can't give her review of the City Hall, but that's second. Anyhow, codified ordinance book. Oh.
Yes, this is our, they used to be annually our updates to the codified, pardon me, the codified ordinances, but I think as you can recall this last year, we seem to be getting them every, it seems like every quarter now that we're getting the updates, and they are either, for the new folks, they're either changes in the state traffic code that our publisher keeps our code up to date with the state code, or they are ordinances that have been passed or amended that belong in our codified ordinance code, and they just along with Amy, they monitor those ordinances and decide which one needs to go in the ordinance books, and then when you approve the update, we put all of those in the codified ordinance books.
So we're looking for a motion to authorize the integration of those new elements into our code. Yes?
Yes.
Heidi, you have the motion?
In a minute. I just want to ask, is this like a housekeeping detail?
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, ma'am.
Okay, so then I would move to update the codified ordinance.
As the paper
Second.
says, with an emergency.
With emergency.
All right.
Thank you.
Second by Roger. Is any discussion on it? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, thank you. Do you want, they gave us a,
She did. She asked me to pass this. Melanie apologizes. She does know it's her second cold, but it actually is a different cold than what she had last time. But it's serious enough that we didn't want her making herself any sicker or making any of us sick. Anyways, I can't speak, so apparently I'm sick. Anyways, that's no. She was still very excited in between coughing and sniffling about the new building, and that's why she's like, I gotta at least show the pictures. So I hope you get a minute, just kind of glance through. What she said is the drywall on I want to say the first floor or second floor, one of the floors is like complete, and she says it looks like an office building now. So it's council chambers is looking like a council chambers, and so she's anxious, and in a month or so to maybe give a tour for council, maybe before one of our meetings. So stay tuned.
okay. Next on there is proposed ward map. Bridget, I guess that's you. Hopefully this is coming to an end, a timely manner.
I enjoy this one so much, though, so, just keep coming back and coming back and coming back. I do want to start, before I speak, and let you know that the question came up on whether or not if these ward apportionments are adopted as proposed, if it would affect the upcoming presidential election. We have not had that official confirmation yet from the Board of Elections. So what we are asking is that we will continue this item, and you won't vote on it, but I would ask that I have the opportunity to at least present the maps, because I've not been able to present these second maps that I completed in August. And then once we get that response back, Amy reached out and has she did explain the director there that it was going to take her some time to research that. So as soon as Amy gets that answer, we'll put it back on the agenda. But I'd like to be able to at least present the maps. So the first set of maps that were presented were not embraced by council. There were several issues that were questioned. So the Community Development Department went back and redid 5 of the 6 ward maps. The charter requires that the wards not be more than a 10% difference. For those of you that have not sat through this 5 times, I'm letting you know that. And if you look at this table, it basically breaks out that point. So if you look at all the wards, we have what was the 2010 census, and then the 2020 census amount in that ward after the ward apportionment maps have been done. It identifies the minimum and maximum that each ward can have, and shows that basically the range factor is 235. So that's what the Community Development Department has to work within. We also use block group blocks. We do not use neighborhoods, we do not use streets, we do not use rivers. We use block group blocks because that is data from the census. It is objective data. It is not associated. We cannot divide it up based on rental versus ownership occupied. We cannot do it based on a street. But I was able to work through and get the maps changed to leave May Street in Ward 4, which was a matter of discussion the last time we presented these maps. So I have the maps before you. I gave you some bigger copies. I can ask specific questions, but this really is specific to the charter and specific to the Ohio Revised Code.
So I have a question.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. So for Ward 1, you show the 2020 census, the 2010 census, and a change of a negative 143. I'm looking at the current ward map as it sits today and the variance that you gave us, and it shows that you added to my, but I don't see where you subtracted, so I'm a little confused.
So the issue is that the census gives us block group blocks. Those block group blocks are defined by the census based on what they put in census tracts.
Okay.
All of the census tracts are different. The census tracts are not the same. So a census tract that existed in your ward back in 2010 is now numbered differently and includes a completely different configuration. So when you hear about them doing the maps at the state level, that's always the discussion. Because basically they reconfigure it based on where they anticipate population went. The census receives basically building permit information from our department, from every department, basically in the state of Ohio and across the country, that is sent in, and using that they then identify new census tracts, new block groups, and new block group blocks. So we basically take the 2010, it's not just the numbers, we actually have completely new census tracts. I can show you the spreadsheet. So we have the tracts, and then what we have to do is, from those tracts, we have to figure out, now that that doesn't exist, what did it used to include? And so it will increase or decrease. So it will identify census tracts that have moved or changed in terms of population count, that we don't look anything like what was before. So it isn't an exact match.
See, I guess my question is that if it's my ward needs to be reduced by 143, but I only see you adding to my ward.
It didn't need to be reduced. It was because of the way the census created the block group blocks.
Okay, okay. I'm good.
It's confusing.
It is confusing.
It is, trust me.
You got the cemetery.
Oh. Oh my.
Jerry.
Just as anecdotally, we
Oh.
had a block group last
Roger?
time that included Acme. And we challenged it and they said, no, that is there. So we counted that, we had to.
Me?
Roger?
Yep. So Bridget, so I understand this. So what you're saying
Franklin
is,
Township.
if I've got this right, that population
Not in the city.
doesn't necessarily equate to the geographical size.
This
So
never
the
was.
geographic could change,
My tenure.
but the population could actually shrink,
Correct.
so that you can make the block.
Correct.
Okay.
So a census tract, for example, well, what happened with a lot of the maps this time around was when we got the data from the
This is Lake
census,
Street,
where
right?
there had been like 2 census tracts, there was now 1 new one, and it wasn't that it absorbed those 2, it absorbed part of those 2 and then part of another one, creating a new one. So a census tract could cross wards that it didn't cross before. So they're completely new configurations in terms of the block group blocks.
So, Jerry, one more.
Go ahead.
Okay, so really, what we have to, it's not necessarily driven by the size. It's not, in terms of geography, it's maybe not even driven by households. It is driven specifically by the block, group block, by the census.
Correct.
Okay.
Absolutely correct.
Anybody else? Chris?
When I'm looking at the, by the way, thank you for this. It's the first time I'm seeing them, so good to see them. I'm seeing some of these, some of the little areas are filled in with the color. There you go, for the audience. And then some have just the red line with no color.
Right.
Can you?
Yeah, so the colored area, if you look at the top of the heading, that is the word boundary.
Yep.
So the red is just literally, these are layers in a mapping program.
Okay.
So the layers, in order for us to, so like in the Ward 1 one I'm looking at, for example, if you see that the red line, the border line, that basically that's a major street.
Mm-hmm.
So the line was continued. I mean, we could have colored that out, but we're building layers. So the Ward 1 is only that yellow, and that red is the boundary.
Okay.
Okay.
So that's the boundary. And then if you go to the next ward, for example, then that, using that map, that blue area is for basically Ward 2.
Can I ask you about Ward 4?
Sure.
So just looking at the very left part of Ward 4, which is Morris. It's sort of, there's the yellow, and then it sort of heads down, keeps going, heading south.
Yeah, that red line is not part of the ward.
It's not part of the ward.
It's just what's in the orange is what's in the ward.
Thank you.
Again, that was a layer of maps. This is literally 6 layers of mapping.
No, it's a great job. I'm just
Yeah.
wondering
Oh, no, yeah,
if I'm,
it's
if,
fine.
like,
No,
what I'm picking up.
So,
on
and then
that.
when you look at the ward map, which we used to have one in council chambers and we don't anymore, all of those 6 colors will be throughout the entire city. And the red lines will be the separations between them.
Mhm.
So if these, once they are voted on, which they have been, I will then take these boundaries and I have to do legal descriptions and then move through that description. So those red lines are important because when I'm, I basically say this many miles east on, center line, et cetera.
Any other questions? Anybody from the audience have quick comment? No? Oh. Every 10 years, this is a real big deal, I'm telling you. Bridget can tell you how much time she has to
All
put
I
in
can
this.
say is I will be retired before the next ward appointment.
Is there a motion from the floor?
A motion.
We can't
Well,
actually
no,
do
we
a
can't
motion yet.
act on it, right?
Yeah. Where this was just, until we get the information from the Board of Elections, we were just going to present tonight, but continue the item for vote until we actually get that information.
Oh, I was reading.
Yeah.
Okay.
We thought we had the answer, but we're
All right.
still waiting now. Okay, thank you.
Thank
All right, nothing else.
This is incumbent upon us if we
Committee of the whole is
to let people
go into community development. Ms. Rosenberg?
Yes, so the only topic we have today is also presented by Bridget, the future role and responsibilities of the Architectural Review Board. You should get a different hat.
I know. So in December, the council voted to make the update to the design guidelines as recommendations. And as I put in my memo, what that has done is create an inherent conflict in the zoning code. Our zoning code, for those of you that are newer to council, in order to amend the zoning code, it has to go through a lengthy process. It requires a public hearing be scheduled before the Planning Commission. Planning Commission discussion, sometimes with text amendments, can be handled in one meeting. Sometimes it can be continued to several meetings. Once they agree on a recommendation of those text amendments, the clerk of council has to schedule another public hearing, and then the text amendments go through that process. So it is lengthy, and I wanted to put that out there because we do have 2 pending cases that if we have to wait for that process, that could be 2-3 months till we get that. So I am asking for an administrative variance or ability to approve those because they do already comply with the sign code that is codified in the zoning code. But the issue at hand is we have statutory requirements for a board for guidelines that are now recommendations. So there's an inherent conflict because the guidelines that were part of that were the appendices to the zoning code were appealed as part of the December authorization to move to those design guidelines being recommendations. So at this point, this is for a discussion and guidance for the administration, because we do need to address those inherent conflicts in the zoning code with regards to the roles and responsibilities of the Architectural Review Board. So they could the options are basically they could transition to an advisory board. There had been an architectural advisory board that was an ad hoc group that had met prior to the Architectural Review Board and the design guidelines being codified in the zoning code. They met with developers and architects and would discuss design with them, which there are recommendations at that point. And then there's also the board could be disbanded. So those are options for council to decide because board responsibilities and roles fall under the purview of council. So I can answer questions, but that's really the matter before you. And then with your guidance based on that, staff will make those text amendment recommendations, take them through the public hearing, planning commission process, and then bring them back to council for a public hearing and review by council before they're formally adopted.
Okay.
We didn't include, I mean, we talked about, there is technically a third alternative. If you want to unvote what you just voted and then go ahead and create a historic district, impose a historic district, which you have chosen not to do in the past, and we've had no property owners volunteer for that. And then you could, again, sort of make those, if it's an actual historic district, you can actually have historic guidelines that require a certificate of, not occupancy, but appropriateness, thank you. But we didn't include that because that's not what you voted. So I threw that out there as full disclosure. That is kind of like if you want to impose a historic district, which is what we said when you approved the design guidelines as recommendations, you don't have to do that, but you need a historic district that's then triggers actual design guidelines that are enforceable and statutory and so forth. So that's that. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, questions. Yes, Melissa.
So if we eliminate the Architectural Review Board, how does that change the overall process? Does it make it shorter? Does it expedite the process? How, other than just that portion of it, will it impact the rest of the zoning and the permitting process?
The Architectural Review Board review, and it is still statutorily required in the zoning code, requires the issuance of a certificate of appropriateness. If you're a project located in the overlay district and you're doing any exterior changes, which include signs or facade changes, you have to have that before you can proceed to the Planning Commission or get a building permit. So in other words, no permitting can occur without the Architectural Review Board certificate of appropriateness being issued. So if the board were eliminated and the text amendments were made to the zoning code, that requirement would be removed. They would come, projects would come, a project comes in, I'm going to do a commercial project because that's what's applicable here, comes in, it's reviewed by staff for regulatory compliance with the zoning code requirements for that zoning district. So if it was in the CD district, the commercial downtown district, we would look at all the zoning code requirements for that. And then if it meets it, then it would go to Planning Commission. If it's a major site plan review, if it's a minor site plan review, it goes to technical review. And then it would, after it got that review, either from Planning Commission or staff, it would then move to the building department. So it would eliminate that first layer that is required now before it can proceed to Planning Commission. Actually, BZA, if a variance is an issue, BZA variances are not always required for every project. But if it is required, it still has to go through that process, the ARB process first, and then to the building.
So, but does it change the time span once somebody, if we don't have the Architectural Review Board and they don't have to go through that process, does it impact the timing of the rest of the process?
It would shorten it.
It would shorten it, okay.
Roughly, the Architectural Review Board meets monthly, and we try to schedule any projects that are scheduled for the Board of Zoning Appeals, if applicable, or Planning Commission, if applicable, once we get a complete packet for the variance request or for the Planning Commission review.
Okay, thank you. Roger.
Bridget, just for a historical perspective, because I want to make sure I understand this. The ARB used to be a advisory, right?
AAB,
I
it was
mean,
called, yeah, the
okay.
Architectural Advisory Board, yes.
Instead of
It was an
review
ad
board.
hoc board.
Ah,
It was not
okay.
sanctioned by the city.
My-
It was-
okay.
But it was run out of the Community Development Department. There are minutes in there, but it was not a board or, the advisory board was not established by council.
So when was the transition to
2011.
2011?
In June of 2011, when the city adopted the zoning code, it codified the design guidelines as appendices to the zoning code and made it statutorily required that a certificate of appropriateness be issued by the Architectural Review Board for any project in the overlay district, which includes the commercial downtown district, the CD district, and then parts west over Main Street along Gogler.
So as a advisory board, by 2011, downtown was pretty well developed.
We were actually beginning the development. I can tell you because I took over as interim in August of 2011, and we broke ground on our first project literally within weeks of Gary getting diagnosed with cancer. So we just began it. So literally it became a statutory requirement, and it was in place for the downtown development.
For the downtown development. Okay. And were decisions made under the statutory requirements, working with developers?
Decisions were made,
Yep.
and they were made by the Architectural Review Board.
Okay, that's what I was curious about. Okay.
Any more, Roger?
No.
Okay. Yes, Heidi.
So, a couple questions. First, starting off with, what's going to happen to the overlay district? Does it still exist?
The overlay district is part of the zoning code, so depending on what occurs here tonight, the overlay district, it can remain. The overlay district can, so an overlay district is a term that's used to overlay existing zoning codes. So we have actually the ability to make overlay districts anywhere. The province was built with an overlay district, for those of you that remember the Edwards group. So, yeah. So, the overlay district, in terms of the zoning code, the chapter that deals with that, 1104, would remain. The overlay district could also remain. It would just not have, depending on what happens, they would not have the statutory requirement that a certificate of appropriateness be issued in that if that's what you choose to do. The overlay district also can have, so an overlay district can be established with any parameters, criteria we want. So it would, basically, the decision on whether or not that exists will have to be contingent upon what decisions you make with regards to certificate of appropriateness, recommendations, and boards. Because if the advisory board, if it's established as an advisory board making recommendations, then they would be, I'm assuming, making those within the overlay district.
Yes. Second question. So I realize that the design guidelines are guidelines, that they're not something that can be enforced. I guess what I would want to know is, if we didn't have an architectural review board or an advisory board, who would communicate these design guidelines to, say, developers or people that are wanting to do some significant redevelopment of their property? And there doesn't seem to be any incentive for them to be actually adhered to or followed in any way.
Well, I think that one of the issues would be that I would assume that you're talking about applying it towards a project that would go to Planning Commission, that scope and scale. So we, staff, provide a staff report to the Planning Commission, and we identify how it complies with the zoning code. So staff would also be putting in there that this, if it's in the overlay district, I should say. If it's in the overlay district, we would say that, you know, it complies with the sections of the update to the design guidelines that we have now, or it does not. And that's something that Planning Commission can decide to address. So Planning Commission has the authority to add conditions to any project, and they have. When we've had projects, I will basically, I would say any of the ones that deal with retail or drive-through, there have been conditions, not on all of them, but on some, and Jeff could speak to this as well, where limits have been put on hours of operation. So Planning Commission has a great deal of latitude with regards to putting conditions, which are requirements, by the way. A condition on a vote from the Planning Commission becomes a requirement for a project. So, for example, let's say we got a project. I will say most projects that we get are not egregious or look different than most downtown projects, but let's say we got one. It could put that it is not aligned with these sections of the updated design guidelines, and then Planning Commission would review that, and they can say, we're not happy with this, and make a condition that they change it. They've done it with landscaping, they've done it with ingress, egress. So staff goes through it for zoning code requirements and regulations and make sure it's met, but there can be conditions added to projects.
Plus, just let me add this, we could put some of these design guidelines into the actual zoning
Of course,
code.
absolutely.
For, you know, it depends, you know, for the overlay district or whatever.
So backlit signs, I'm going to say that one just because it's one. Typically, we are mostly getting signs at this point because the downtown, which incorporate, and even actually Gogler, that west of the bridge, has been pretty much redeveloped. But for the signs, backlit signs or internally lit signs are not favored based on other cases that have been before the Architectural Review Board. Now, it was granted as a variance by council for the properties on West College, the Galleria, or Gallery. So if that was something that council or members were wanting to be codified, we would put that in the sign portion, chapter 1109, that signs in the overlay district cannot be internally lit. Because that overlay still overlays basically parts of the downtown as well as part of Gogler.
Thank you.
Or any other requirement.
Any other questions from council? Do you have a question, Roger?
So Bridget, if our downtown, I think we all like the way it looks, and when we talk about, and you really do a great job in terms of the zoning and what's required and those type of things, but it appears that the issue about what the exterior looks like, more than egress, you know, signs are, sure, but what the building looks like and how does that fit into what has become a very eclectic downtown. It looks great. So the question is, ultimately, is it, if we had no ARB or we had no AAB, ultimately, is it come down to the Planning Commission saying yes or no? Or if they can't come to agreement, is it going to end up in City Council? Or if there was an agreement and City Council didn't agree with, you know, if there was some crazy Dolly World kind of thing going on downtown, are we going to be able to say, no, you're not going to do that? Or how is that going to look, I guess?
Well, Hope can speak to this, but the Kent City Council has authority to issue such mandate. I will say that if that was the case, I think the staff would know about it ahead of time, and I would think you would be coming and talking to Planning Commission, and Planning Commission would basically be denying that ability for that project to move forward.
What do other communities do?
Well, not every community has design guidelines.
No.
I mean, that's one of the things I think that I worked at Summit County. I dealt with, I don't even know now, there's more than 32 communities, I believe. And not all of them, very few of them actually had design guidelines. Hudson had design guidelines, Talmadge has design guidelines, but they also had historic districts that dated back into the 70s. So, but there are communities that do not. So, you know, I spent a lot of time looking at design guidelines. So some have design guidelines for just a portion of their town, others do not. So our design guidelines were initiated through Ron Berbert's efforts with Main Street Kent, and then were codified in 2011 with a continuation of those efforts, because we were about to put over $110 million into downtown, and there was some consternation on how that might translate with regards to how the buildings looked. So the design guidelines were adopted and the downtown was built, but some of the review meetings sessions were challenging, I will tell you that. Some of them went through numerous iterations, and sometimes the goalposts were moved. So it made it challenging.
Well, I apologize to Dolly, by the way. I didn't mean-
And, yes, Dave.
Can I just add to that too? Because I know we have to kind of plan for the worst, right? So we're always thinking the worst of the developers. But I have to say, particularly the bigger stuff, I would often get invited to very early meetings with the developer in Bridget's office, and we'd sit over there, and their architect and their engineers, and they'd say, "This is what we're thinking." And we would spend an hour, a couple hours just talking about, well, this is what the community likes to see. There's a lot of collegial work in most cases. I mean, most times people that are making that kind of investment in our community don't want to pick a fight right out of the gate, right? I mean, so it's good to be cautious and make sure you have a backstop, right, for those Dolly World or whatever you call it there. But I have to say, let's not forget that there is an existing informal process that works. I've seen projects change direction. Jim Bowling does it too. He's often in the meetings. The developer will be like, "We're here," especially the good ones. I mean, the good ones come in early and they say, "Tell us what we need to be aware of and kind of like how to design this thing in a way that's going to be successful in here, because we're spending $1 million and we want our property to be a shining new asset that makes lots of money for us too," right? They're in it to make money. They're not here to paint ugly signs, right? I mean, now there's a matter of taste, and I get that. And again, still need a backstop. But I don't want to forget that a lot of times this process takes care of itself, and that's presumably very much true with those other communities that don't have design guidelines. They do a lot of those conversations early on, and then it eventually makes its way, like Jeff was on the Planning Commission, and he would be a part of that discussion there. So just keep that in mind, too.
To Dave's point, we meet with virtually every developer that's in a new construction project, and everything is looked at. I've had 4 meetings just in the last month with developers that are coming forward with projects that I'm excited about. I'm not going to talk about yet because it's not official. And you have to remember, this is an asset and investment. If they want to resell this, they are not going to make it atrocious. I mean, people often bring up to me, well, look at the architectural school on campus. Well, first of all, that's state. That's the university. That is not. We had nothing to do with it. And I think it's a lovely building, by the way. I walk my dog by it all the time. But you have to remember that is a school, right? For-profit developer is going to build something that is aesthetically pleasing for tenants to occupy and to resell. So we don't get things that are egregious. And quite honestly, we had, and I'll use Randy Ruttenberg, because all of you know him from Collegetown, Kent, when they came forward with a project that was going to be on 227 Franklin, where the old BW3s was, and we knew their architect well because we had done 4 buildings with them downtown already. And he laid it out, and we're like, "Looks great. You're never going to get it through Architectural Review Board," because they wanted to use black brick. I'm like, "You are never going to get that through the Architectural Review Board." And they're like, "We still want to try." I'm like, "Okay." And they tried, and it was voted down. And so then they're like, "Okay, you were right." And I'm like, "Well, I know they want natural color brick or traditional color brick." So they came back. The project obviously didn't come to fruition. The parcel's been sold and is under. It's actually had numerous offers on it and still has no one buying it. But anyway, so that project is one where we advise them ahead of time, that is not going to resonate. And then they made the change, and they did get one approved. So developers do tend to listen to us. The architect, I think, was just he just was kind of curious to see what happens. He didn't get that through up in Cleveland either, by the way.
Jeff, do you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to speak to time on the Planning Commission, and one of the options on here is having an advisory board in addition to the design guidelines. And I feel like for a while on the Planning Commission, a lot of projects that we did would go to Architectural Review Board for a courtesy review, even though it wasn't in their overlay district, which sometimes could really muddy the waters in the decision-making process, because we might get notes from the ARB that we had no way of addressing through Planning Commission. So I think just having a set of design guidelines without any kind of advisory committee would be a lot easier to navigate, especially with the developers that we tend to get through Kent.
Heidi.
So, not to put you on the spot, but does staff have a recommendation?
Staff's not going to make a recommendation, no. Staff does the work, and we'll adjust the code according to what council advises us.
Any further questions, Heidi? Yes, Jack.
Yeah, Bridget, we had talked about a historic district in downtown Kent. You and I had talked about that. how would that work if we did declare that area a historic district?
If council designates a historic district, then we would need to, because the design guidelines that were just adopted as an update are generalized design guidelines. They are not historic design guidelines. So we would hire a consultant to write historic ones that would be specific to that historic district.
Okay.
And if, for those of you on council that are newer, that was, I actually just shared this information with Melissa. I actually maybe tomorrow should disseminate it to everyone as a reminder. So that process was begun in 2012. Basically the design guidelines that had a historic content but were not historic guidelines as they were adopted in June of 2011. And then in 2012, Ron Burbick bought the old hotel, the Franklin Hotel, and he wanted to seek tax credits. The only way you can seek state and federal tax credits is to be what's called a certified local government, or CLG. So Jim Silver, the former law director, began that process. I worked with him on that process, and Jim identified a proposed historic district. And when that was put out, because it has to go through a public hearing process, all the property owners in it were like, do not want to be in it. It created quite an uproar, so it was pulled. I contacted the State Historic Preservation Office and said, okay, we have a developer who's trying to redo a major property here in our downtown that has been vacant and blighted for a while. He needs these tax credits, but we're not going to have a historic district. They said if we adopted the historic preservation ordinances, which is the 1393 that does the historic preservation ordinance and then the Committee on Design and Preservation, that would be enough to help us get the certified local government as we work to see where we could actually get a historic district established. Council could have imposed a historic district without the consent of the property owners. Jim Silver, our law director at the time, advised that because this is the process we use for almost all others, that at least a majority of those property owners should agree to be in that district. And to date, no one has come forward with a proposed district that shows 51% or more of the property owners in that proposed historic district want to be in the historic district. So if that happens, we would take that back before council, present it, it could be adopted, and at that point, then we would contract to get design guidelines specific to that historic district, not to the overlay, just to that historic district. And I will say that every 2 years, I submit a report to SHPO, the State Historic Preservation Office. I report that we still don't have a historic district. I let them know whether we have designated anything locally historic. We have not. We've designated 5, but none since 2016. And I have not heard anything back from the State Historic Preservation Office with regards to us losing our certified local government status. Certified local government status, all it means is we are a developer in our community is eligible to seek state and federal historic tax credits. There's a small grant source that's available through SHPO, but it's de minimis and small for some projects if you have it in a historic district. But it is not something the city ever had before 2012. We were not a certified local government. It was sought for Ron Burbick to seek those tax credits for the downtown hotel. And anecdotally, Ron regretted it. He told both Dave and I and others because it added money to his project. I think many of you heard that from Ron. It was not just us.
Krista, do you have a question?
You can ask a follow-up.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, go ahead, Jeff.
Does the Historical Society have the ability to, not officially, but call the area a historic district and work with the businesses themselves?
Absolutely. Ad hoc, you can absolutely do that. Absolutely. It wouldn't be codified, so there wouldn't have any city statutory involvement or requirement. Honestly, we kind of did that with the South End. If you remember, they wanted to designate the historic South End. That did not get sent to the State Historic Preservation Office because it did not meet any of the requirements for a historic district. But it was approved by the Committee on Design and Preservation, like as the local recommendation and supported by council. It was in support of Doria Daniels' efforts and others, but it did not meet the requirements for a historic district, nor would it have ever qualified for a certified local government status for a historic district. But you can absolutely do that, just like Doria did. So we could do that locally for sure.
Further, Jack?
Oh, I'm done, thanks.
Krista, do you have a question?
Just one, which is, I feel like I'm learning so much. Thank you.
Call me anytime.
I need to shadow you for a month or something. if you just let me just watch you work for a month. So going back to the example of not Dolly World wants to move in, what would we call it? Kent World or something? Not Kent World, but Black Brick example. As it stands now, there is no ARB for you to say to a developer, that's not going to get through the ARB.
As of right now, there is an ARB in the zoning code, and that's the issue. We have design guidelines that are recommendations now.
Yeah.
And then statutorily, we have an architectural review board that is supposed to issue a certificate of appropriateness based on guidelines that no longer are part of the zoning code. So we have a conflict.
I see.
So
Okay.
I will say anecdotally too, for example, the Architectural Review Board did have the recommendations, as Jeff recommended, outside of the overlay district. It was in 2021 limited just into the overlay, and numerous projects that went through outside of the overlay were built, and there was none of them did we receive any complaints with regards to design. Many of them were typical traditional style that you would see in other areas if it was a restaurant or if it was a nursing home, whatever.
So I was going to ask, do you see any potential if the ARB transitions to an advisory role or the ARB is completely disbanded, that puts more onus on the Planning Commission, BZA, and Community Development to review?
I don't.
Do you see any issue with more work, more guidelines to mull through?
No, we go through, we meet with every project. There's 3 of us that meet. We look at everything: setbacks, dumpster enclosures, lights, you name it. So the design guidelines will just be part of that process. We did 3 cases last week. Went through everything. There were applications that were submitted, 2 for Planning Commission, 1 for BZA. They were incomplete. So we go through them. So for example, if for a Planning Commission submission, the design guidelines have been adopted as recommendations in the overlay district. So a project, they will need to address that in their application. Say we reviewed the design guidelines and kind of report to us where they are aligning with those. We actually require that already with regards to when anybody asks for a map amendment. You haven't been through that process yet, but you will. So when they change our maps, our zoning, like somebody wants to move to a different type of zoning district and we change that, they give us a cover letter explaining why they think they match that desire to do that. So we would update our Planning Commission requirements that they address that.
So it strikes me a little bit that, well, one word that's coming up for me is redundant. Would you say that the ARB serves a lot of redundant roles vis-a-vis the Planning Commission, BZA?
That is not my decision to say. We work with the boards and commissions that are assigned to the Community Development Department.
Thank you.
Any more questions from council? Do you have a question, Roger?
I'd like to get back to Jeff's comment if I could. Jeff, could you clarify what the issue was that you felt?
Well, I'll throw an example out because we talked about the black brick. So the new Skulls on Cherry Street, when they took over that building, the hair salon, when they took over that building, it was outside of the overlay district. I believe we got a letter from ARB asking us to deny it because it was out, they didn't like the colors or whatever it was. I don't think we had the ability to decide that we couldn't vote on something because of the colors. And I ended up thinking it came out really great. So that's just one example of where we were getting influence on projects that we couldn't enforce their decision because it was outside of their jurisdiction. I think another one was the hotel that was proposed on Williams and Franklin. There was some issue that they weren't happy with the design that came out. And I think, we got some letters saying that can you guys not approve this because of X, Y, and Z, and I think that was out of our purview.
So with the proposed, if like Planning Commission were to become the review process for this, the application would be amended that the Planning Commission then would have that as part of the site plan review process. So like that would be an amendment. In the Planning Commission, they also have statutory requirements for review of a site plan in the zoning code. It's a long list of what has to be in the Planning Commission application and what they review. So if alignment with the updated design guidelines are to be part of that process, it would say that we require a cover letter from every Planning Commission applicant explaining what their project is and what they plan to do. So they would have to address then, like, yes, we align, and then they would explain where. That would be an amendment that we would have to make in the zoning code.
All right, Roger, we got one last question, then we're going to go to the audience.
Okay. So, Bridget, let's say that that happens, and it goes to the planning commission. Planning commission says to the developer, no, okay. What is the option of the developer?
They resubmit, and
Okay.
then it comes back to planning commission, or the way the law is written, they go to the Court of Common Pleas.
Okay, so in other words, city council really is out of the equation.
Absolutely.
Where now the ARB can,
Planning Commission and Planning Commission and the Board of Zoning Appeals, the appeal of any decision of those two boards, they either resubmit and it goes back through that board review process, either Planning Commission or BZA, or they file with the board or with the Court of Common Pleas.
Okay. Does anyone in the audience have a question or something they'd like to say? If you do so, go ahead and step up to the microphone and please give your name and address for the record.
My name is Doug Fuller. I live at 1431 River Edge Drive. I came here to Kent in 1968 as a student, and other than a couple of years I spent after graduating back at Massachusetts, I married a local girl and moved back here and been here ever since. I've been an registered architect in the state for over 45 years. I keep that license current even though I am retired. I'm a little upset, so forgive me in advance. And I know a lot of you are tired about hearing about the design guidelines, and I don't blame you. You were told when this process started it would take, I think, 4 to 6 months. Well, we're now out over 2 years. And you know what's just happened? You've been asked for the first time the really pertinent question about design guidelines. For the first time. Now, maybe I'm wrong. I haven't been to every meeting that you've had discussions about it. But I don't think anyone's ever asked you, do you want an architectural review board? Why weren't you asked that 2 years ago? You could have saved $30,000 because you wouldn't need it. And I would like an explanation, and maybe I misunderstand this. These are the guidelines. And on page 3, which is the first page, glossary of terms, it says compliance with the guidelines is not mandatory. Compliance with the guidelines is not mandatory. That means it doesn't matter. It could be blank pages. A developer, a building owner, doesn't have to do a thing. How does it get to you 2 years after, through this process, and no one's ever asked you that? If you want to spend $30,000 and make it so it just doesn't matter. No one's asked you that. How come? Why hasn't that been asked? I mean, that would have been a hell of a discussion 2 years ago. Instead of framework, if you don't want an architectural review board, if you want planning commission to make architectural decisions, then God bless you. You are the elected representative. You set the policy. If that's what you want, then I won't be happy about it. But I'll understand. I mean, people like to complain about architectural review boards because everybody has their own opinion about buildings. You know, they like them or they don't like them. You know, So anyway, I'm just amazed that here, at the last minute, you're being asked to make a decision in a hurry and didn't even give you an option of having an architectural review board that had a little input into the process. Didn't do that. Why aren't you at least offered that opportunity? To talk about it among yourselves. Have you talked about it among yourselves, collectively, in a whole group? I bet you never, because it would have to be in this room. I don't understand how we got here. And it's just unfair to the community that you are being told some things that you're being told, and they're not completely true. Some of them are. You know, there's personalities that get involved. If I'm wrong about the mandatory thing, that because it says that, it doesn't really mean that. I guess I'd like to know that because it really kind of changed a couple of things. but that is what it says in there. You've been... Over the last few months, if not the last couple of years, in fact, today, the Architectural Review Board has been thrown under the bus many times. Many times. They haven't been called evil, but it's been kind of close to that. And I'll tell you, I think it's unfair. Because what you haven't been shown, while we like to talk about compliant developers, this guideline, of course, makes it irrelevant. Whether they're good or not, they can do anything they want. But the development projects that we've done in Kent have substantially been improved by the Architectural Review Board. It is amazing what good developers will bring in. You know, one of the things you always should look for, and I wish I'd advised the community back when we were first doing this, never hire a developer that their common practice is to sell their building within 5 or 10 years. Because you know that's what they figure the value of the construction is and the level that they put into the materials. They want to walk away from it as quick as they can before that thing starts to break down. But anyway, that's another topic. There are many projects. I would like the opportunity to collect a couple other people, maybe more, to come and talk to you at the earliest time you would allow to bring back. I would need cooperation from the city to do this. I would like to bring back some of the original concepts that were brought for the Fairmont project, what those buildings originally looked like. And I'll tell you, my recollection, I don't have it in front of me, I was on the board then. I had to resign from the board because I was a practicing architect. You couldn't be on the architectural board if you were practicing architects. Think of that over. But I was on the board at the time, and the building, through cooperation with the developer, through cooperation with the Architectural Review Board, and to a degree with the Community Development Department, we got a better product out of that, a lot better. There was metal siding on the building. It's not to say there isn't some now. There is some, but more sensitively used. There was concrete block all over the place instead of brick. I mean, the building is much better. And I understand Bridget has told you how developers, some, have yelled at her. That should never happen. It shouldn't happen. But I'm telling you, we also need a community development director who has the spine to stand up to a developer that comes in here and wants to put in something in.
I don't think we can tolerate that, Doug.
Do you have some comments specific to the discussion here?
Oh, yeah,
please?
these are.
Specific to what council is being asked.
Well, these are. I would like the opportunity to come back at the first opportunity to get out some of those old drawings and walk some people from the Architectural Review Board through those projects and what the improvements were made. Because if you have no standards, what you're going to get is somebody else's idea of a good idea, whether it be how cheap it can be done or what their idea is. So I would like you to not move ahead with this until you find out what the value of the Architectural Review Board is. And, you know, I just got this stuff. I never expected someone to come in and say we shouldn't have some kind of review. And so the comment, just one or two comments on the two options you've been given. The number one option is just to have an advisory architectural board that might sit down with a developer and work out something that we might think would be better, while the Community Development Department is saying to them, don't worry, you don't have to do any of that. That's what the code says. You don't have to comply with it. So why have it at all? If there are no regulations and any input architects or the Architecture Review Board might have isn't going to be supported by the city, there's no sense in having it. The second is really the same, having the staff review architecture. I'm sorry. I have more respect for my profession. I really hope you would. I don't think you would have hired a planning commission director from some city to design a new city hall. If you don't have any respect for what the architects might have and the improvements they might have, then get away with them, then do away with them. And that would be your decision. I would also add, all of the, many of the cities you go to that you say are great places to go to, you'll probably find they have a good, solid design guidelines that guide what happens in that city. You do, as a city council, set the policy for the city, and you do have the right to say, we have some requirements when you build in our city.
Thank you, Doug. Are you through?
So I just want to give you a quick list. I'd like to be able to show you the Fairmount buildings. I'd like to show you the building that's kind of a controversy now down at Franklin and Erie, to show you what that building originally looked like and what it's going to look like. I think you'll think it was a vast improvement. The courthouse, if you'd seen the original things, and it kind of looked like a two-story retail store.
Thank you.
Architecture Review Board put a lot of value into that. Whether you like it or not, it changed the look of the building. I guess my time's up.
Thank you. Anyone else who'd like to address council, please start with your name and your address, please, for the record. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Bridget Tipton. I live at 458 West Main Street. I'm also a registered architect practicing in Kent. I'm currently on the Architecture Review Board. In the memo that you got before the meeting, I'm one of the people who have expired. My term long expired on that board, but continue to serve. I was, I think, one of the squeaky wheels that asked for new guidelines. And so if I had thought that the board would have been disbanded at that request, it's not one I would have made. So I'm disappointed too at where we are today. I think it was probably not the goal of that financial investment to build these new guidelines and then not have a board that would be responsible for stewarding them. For the Planning Commission recommendation, I've been on the board when, so outside of the overlay district, the Architectural Review Board would make recommendations to Planning Commission regarding the aesthetics of the building. I understand the complications of taking those recommendations into consideration at the Planning Commission level. I think it was this past year that was removed from the Architectural Review Board's purview because it didn't make sense and it was really hard to apply. So I think that an advisory board would behave in much the same way. It would be very hard to apply. I don't think anybody would take it seriously. I don't think that you could get volunteers to serve on it. I personally would not serve on an advisory-only board. It would not be worth my time, the developer's time, and then the people who would be fit to try to enforce those things, it would just be really difficult. So that path seems to not be very logical, even though it's one of the only paths forward that leaves some semblance of an architecture review. But that doesn't make sense. I agree that at the current state there's no incentive to apply. It sounds to me at this point that the most logical path forward is going to be that Planning Commission has to apply these guidelines in some way. That seems to be the general direction. I think that's going to fall short. The Architecture Review Board has requirements for the board makeup that I'm not sure that Planning Commission has. So Architecture Review Board has to have architects or designers or urban planners on that board that make up that board. I don't think Planning Commission has the same requirement. Does anybody know? It's just a citizen, like a voting resident, I think. So if it goes that way, which it sounds like it's going to, I would be interested to hear some kind of refinement of that board makeup to get somebody on the board who knows how to interpret and apply these guidelines. That would be like, that's like down here, right? Like the Architecture Review Board of some kind that is actually enforceable is way better, but this feels too complicated, I guess, and so we're going to be kind of here with Planning Commission. It would be great if that board makeup had some kind of requirement for a design professional to be on it. I think that's all I have to say, but I'll just keep coming to anything that has to do with architecture. I'll be here because I'm going to be in Kent for my entire life. So, thank you.
Thank you. Bridget, just quickly, this is a discussion. I know that you're asking for a motion for variance on two signs.
Two administrative signs.
And then are you looking for a motion, or
guidance motion.
Guidance
At least
motion.
guidance on what direction you would like, because we have to make those zoning code amendments. So I need to have some direction as to what role and responsibility will be assigned to the ARB, so that because there's multiple sections in the zoning code that would need to be amended.
Okay, so let's start with the variance for the 2 signs that are in the pipeline that are waiting for an answer.
I can very quickly explain. They both comply with the sign requirements for the overlay district as well in the CD district. The one needed a variance and also was approved for a pre-existing non-conforming use. So with regards to the regulatory requirements for both signs, they meet it. The second sign is actually, they're both unlit. They're both simple, basic signs. One is actually 2 signs on one building, and so technically it has to go as a comprehensive sign package to Planning Commission. But right now I can't take it forward to Planning Commission unless I get that administrative ability to move it forward for the 2 sign projects.
Can I get a,
So moved.
Second.
okay, very good, seconded by Jeff. Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion passes. All right, and then secondarily, for if council is interested in making a motion or offering some direction on the future of what we've been discussing of ARB. Yes, Heidi.
Well,
sorry.
Roger also, but I don't know what Roger's going to say, but
Go ahead.
well, I don't know. I think that the least complicated way, and one that least complicated in the sense of what Bridget was saying about being able to recruit members and things like that, would be to try it without an architectural review board and work to codify some of the guidelines that make sense to codify. So that way there's more, there's more teeth to some of these. And I know that can be done, like, maybe for a guideline where you want first floor retail or something like that, not offices in a downtown district. That could be put in the zoning code.
Correct. And that's the kind of guidance we're looking at, so that
Yes.
we can take some of those, and that would be something that will go through Planning Commission and come back to council.
And,
So-
the massing and things like that can be also codified. So those are the kinds of things that the Planning Commission can say, I don't know about the colors, but that has always been so subjective and a point of disagreement within the Architectural Review Board itself and the community. So there's wide-ranging tastes within the Architectural Review Board that we have. There's some sense to the argument that was then, when the whole downtown really was being redeveloped, and this is now where we have not as much.
So how do you have a motion, or are we just going to make comments?
Well,
I'm making comments
it was
for
left
direction, but-
open whether
Okay.
it was left open for
That's good. No, I'm
discussion.
happy.
But I'm saying
Point
that
of, point
it
of order,
makes-
Roger. We'll just have Heidi finish
just-
and then we'll call on you.
I'm going to say, and somebody could make a motion, that I think that the most simplified process would be to not have an architectural review board at this time.
Roger, did you have something you'd like to say?
Yeah, I appreciate that you were making a comment, Heidi. I wasn't being critical. I was afraid you were going to make a motion, and then, at this point.
I'd kind
No,
of like to hear from
Well,
council
I struggle a little bit when I hear a young person like Bridget come to the mic and say that there won't be people who are willing to step up, because I just think you're terrific. I mean, I've heard you, I saw you operate. I think you do a wonderful job. My thought is I'm always looking for a different option. I know Doug's very passionate about, it's this or that, and this won't work and that won't work. In my estimation, I'm leaning towards the idea of an advisory board with a codicil on it, because I don't think we're done. I don't think we're done in the city of Kent. I think that there are things that'll be coming down. And we're not done with hearing from young voices. We have some young voices on council now. We're not done hearing from young voices. And I'm leaning towards a concept of an advisory board, and we give it 2 years, and we ask them to help us codify those things, but I still think I'd like to have them at the table. I think but that's where I'm at. I'm not sure how it would look. I know it's going to be complex. I mean, everything's complex we do. So I'm not ready to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I still think an advisory could work, and I think there are people in this community, I think there are architects in this community, especially young architects, who would like to step up and help. I mean, that's been the history of filling our boards. But I certainly understand the difficulties that would bring, just as you were saying, that we want to streamline it a little bit more. So I'm not so sure how well that would work. That's just my thinking, if we're just throwing out our thoughts, and that's what you asked for.
So we got one advisory, one not an advisory. Does anyone else care to weigh in? Yes, Jack?
Yeah, I have to agree with Roger. I think an advisory board, even though Bridget brought up nobody would want to serve on that because really it had no power. But the truth of the matter is that I feel better if I know that architects are looking at something, making decisions, because as a historian, that Huntington building is just, I mean, that's one of the things that just can't happen again. It just can't. It totally disjoints the whole historic portion of downtown. It looks horrible.
Anyone else on council care to weigh in?
I'm going to have to say that I disagree with that, because as much as we can look back 100 years at a building, we also have to make decisions going 100 years forward, too, and what's going to happen and how things are going to develop. And I think having an advisory board makes it more difficult for anybody to make a definitive decision, because their input may not match up with what's written in the zoning code or what's written in the guidelines or with the feeling of the planning commission or council. It can be very subjective what comes through an advisory board. So it can be very difficult to align the two when trying to make the right decision.
Hang on, let me see if anybody else, does anybody else have a comment on, or thoughts on that? Yes, Chris.
Yeah, I was going to say, it does feel like we have two options, neither of which are there's a binary. It's either an advisory board that has little teeth and architects like Bridget may not serve on it, or it's no architecture review board at all. And I find myself very persuaded by the notion that it's important to have architects engaged, like previously at an ARB, and that the Planning Commission may not have those urban planners, architects, designers. I'm coming into this a bit new, so I find myself a bit sort of back and forth on this. I wish there was a third option we could consider, where some of these design guidelines could have some teeth. Architects could weigh in. They could participate enthusiastically. What that is, I'm coming in new, and so I almost wish we could kick the can down the road a little bit and explore a third, fourth, fifth options that get away from just this binary.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I've got Heidi. Anyone else who hasn't weighed in want to weigh in yet before I? Okay. Yes, Heidi, and then Roger.
Yeah, in response to that, I think that it might be worth revisiting the idea of a historic district, but right now that's not on the table, and we have and some kind of an architecture board could be involved with the historic district and historic guidelines, that kind of thing. So I see that as a potential for us to discuss. Right now, we don't have that. And maybe that's what people are really longing for in this, to help downtown celebrate the historic features and ensure that those are taken into account going forward. So I'm not really ready to make a motion personally.
Yes, Roger.
you know, maybe there's another way of looking at this. When you look at the requirements of some of our other boards, we insist that someone has a certificate of some kind, whether it's you know, inspection or those type of things. Maybe we're looking at this, we need to look at this a little differently. Well, we maybe think about making a requirement that at least 2 members of the Planning Commission have to be licensed architects, or 1 member has to be a licensed architect. I mean, that would be that would at least have a voice of an architect looking initially at plans saying, "Now this isn't going to fly," based on that's an idea, just throwing it out.
That's not a motion, just an idea?
No
Okay.
motion.
Okay. No motion so far, all right, okay.
I'll make the motion to disband the ARB.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Discussion.
Discussion.
You should have a discussion after the
Have
motion.
discussion
Yeah.
after the motion.
My bad. We have a motion,
Yeah,
discussion.
Jeff's first. You made the motion.
Jeff?
I think I've made all my points about how I feel about it.
Okay. And the second, Heidi?
Yeah, I think I'm leaning toward that because I think that we still might have some potential other directions to go, but right now we need to resolve this conflict with the design guidelines, and we're in a place where we're in limbo, essentially, with this. And yes, the advisory architectural review board might not conflict with that, as that's one of these options, but I don't know how that will really, how that would really work. I mean, I could support that idea for a short time to see how that goes, but right now I feel like let's just start over. And that would be meaning to let's try it without.
Further discussion? All right. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye.
All right.
Might want to do a show of hands.
Yeah, let's do a show of
Show of
hands.
hands, maybe.
A show of hands then. All those in favor? Opposed?
1, 2, 3.
Looks like motion passes. All right. And you got your variance already?
Yeah,
Okay.
because you made that motion, and that's just an action, I believe, to allow us to proceed with moving those 2 signed applications forward, correct?
I would like to actually put that in an ordinance, since they're overruling the statute, but
Okay.
start
Okay.
doing whatever you need to do to
Get it
be ready to
prepped.
go, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
That concludes.
Okay, sidewalks.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, we have 3 items. The first is the Craft Beer Festival road closure, and I think Bridget's coming back up again. It's the Bridget Show.
Eric and Boy Scouts, that's why I'm. So as the special event permit memo Eric put together and sent to council explains, the Kent JCs are expanding the footprint for their very successful craft beer fest that they've held annually. There is a map that is included that lays out and identifies the area. The new configuration does basically close the bridge at Gogler to stop people from driving down, and then allows the utilization of the hometown plaza. I can take any questions about the map, or there's members here from the Kent JCs that can speak to it as well, if you're curious about the event.
So I have a question. We've gotten complaints in the past from business owners further down on water, that rather than, if the street is closed at Columbus, to basically get access to Bent Tree Coffee, so that they're not in sort of a dead zone in that space. So I know that they're looking to expand the event. So I guess I'm wondering if well, I guess 2 questions. If it's possible to move that closure to Columbus so that it's easier, so that Bentry Coffee can stay open, or if the event organizers had considered a different, say an Erie Street or further down by the
So in other
farmer's
words,
market.
It is open.
Instead of cordoning it off here,
Is it?
move it down towards,
It's just a one-way street
Well,
coming
if
from
it-
St. Pat's.
Okay, and is that where,
The loop is right here.
maybe I'm looking at it wrong.
Bentry's over
So traffic is going to be able to get,
Yeah.
okay,
It'll
and
be
so
okay.
road
Yeah,
road
she's okay.
closure signs
yeah,
will
there will
be,
be signs, for
There'll be
sure.
signs up here.
where will they be?
The signs, they usually post one right
Brady.
at, at Brady, so before you head down that it's closed. It does say road closed ahead, we could say road closed at,
Yeah,
you know.
I think
But
the,
the parking's still utilized too there, and it'll be open till that time.
the point of the matter is that Bentry Coffee gets cut off from customers because of road closures and road closure signage. There's a gap, right, from where the road is closed and where the actual sign is. I'm just trying to make it possible for them
Sure.
to still get customer traffic. A
Sure.
big road close ahead sign, generally, people turn right at that
right,
point.
so maybe not put it as,
So-
maybe not put it as far north as they do on North Water, because it is almost right at that intersection at Fairchild, so maybe it needs to be closer. I mean, it is a, 25-mile zone, so we could move it further down and even maybe have it say where it's closed at.
Yeah, I think that business, in speaking with them, would prefer to either be part of an event or have traffic accessing it without a road closure sign in front of it. I think for Oktoberfest, he'd mentioned that was a better setup. I don't have like the Oktoberfest map in front of me, but I think if you could have, if it were possible to have a look at that Oktoberfest map, just for where that, where the closure is and signage and stuff, I think that would be.
So if I make that adjustment, if I have to?
Would be exactly just.
So basically the issue is with the road closure here, it kind of makes it a challenge for some of the businesses here, and then the city puts a sign here.
Yep.
So she's saying that the Oktoberfest configuration, which I need to pull that, event permit would adjust that. So we can adjust it, and then I could bring it back to council. So, like, we'll
Yeah.
Oktoberfest is on Frank, isn't there, right?
It is
so
on
that's
here,
probably
yeah.
why he was okay with it, because it wasn't in that
It's on
area.
Franklin Avenue.
I don't remember
October's
where.
it's on Erie Street and that, it isn't down there.
So you're saying, but basically I think what she's conveying is that to move it further down on Franklin versus on North Water.
So we ran into a lot of issues a couple
Okay, why
years
don't
ago.
you come to the mic and say your name and address for the record.
Sorry. Dennis Campbell, I actually live in Stowe, 4057 Bishopsgate Circle, Stowe, Ohio. So we actually did it on Franklin a couple years ago, and it caused a lot of issues for the businesses there because it is such a heavy alcohol event. We also didn't have enough space with the booths for the breweries, and it created a lot of congestion and a lot of issues. So we tried it that one year to move it over to Franklin, and it did not work well. We got feedback from attendees that it was not a good setup for that event because of how much more narrow the street area is on Franklin. And so we moved this so that way, I do agree, I wish we had a sign that was a little bit more of like, don't come down this far. But we're happy to also include Bentry in the event. We've done that for a lot of our events, for grazers, other businesses there. If they want to participate, and we're glad to have them. We've waived fees for vendors that are those businesses on that street to be able to come and participate in it with no problem at all. Happy to figure out the best thing for them, because we never, especially as the KenJCs, ever want to hurt a downtown business in any way, shape, or form.
Well, I mean, I can't speak for Bentry. Did you reach out to any of the businesses further down on Water? I know that there's the ones that you had to sign, that had to sign for closing it. Did you have a chance, did you reach out?
We've only gone, so this is the only change that's been our setup for the first year, and then the past couple years, and then the only change that we added was for the section of Main Street this year, because of safety issues is one of our biggest things with that. It is a very congested event, and I've been very concerned with, if we had an emergency, how does emergency personnel make it through? How do we have spent way too much time with the police and fire over my career in Kent State? How do we have that access, but also we have a long line for ticket registration that people tend to flow into the street. So we're trying to avoid those issues, and we also had people running from the event across Main Street going to Franklin to try
I see
to
what you're
eat
saying.
there as well, so.
Why don't you put it back here?
I might make a suggestion. I
That's
drive
what I-
through there, and I know that the sign often says road closed ahead. Maybe it should say road open through Portage. Instead of just a generic road closed, we actually identify where, because they are located north of Portage, and their parking lot you can get
There's an
to.
alley.
So rather, I mean, we kind of always do the same signage in the location, but maybe that's what we need to do,
No,
is make that
no,
message
Portage
a
is
little
way down
clearer, how
further.
far out the road is open down to Portage.
Well, if, that same thought, on some projects, like if Jim has an extended engineering type project, I don't know if we've done it here, but in other cities I've done this where we actually list Bent Tree Coffee open
Yes.
on the sign.
Right, that's, yeah.
Or whatever else. So
Change
we
the
could actually
signage.
print that on the sign itself. This is road closed ahead, but Bent Tree open, access open, or,
Access over through
Oh,
Portage.
yeah.
all
well, I think,
businesses
I want to
over
actually identify the business. I mean, there's no harm to that. It's fine.
This is an alley.
And we'll reuse the sign. God knows we have enough events down there,
I
so.
think they even use like a, yeah, we do.
And any business that wants to be on that it's going to be open. I mean, that's an alternative. I hear that, and you and I have had this discussion recently, and I think it is time. I sort of made the commitment to Gwen, that I think we do need to revisit
Mhm.
a lot of our, sort of how we can optimize the balance between street closures and business accessibility. I think they become equally important. For a while, it was like, hey, if that street's closed, it's no problem, everything's great. Well, times have changed in restaurant, retail world, and drive-by traffic kind of matters again. I mean, it always did, but it matters. So we've kind of got to revisit that. So we're going to continue that review internally for all our events, but for this one, and that's why I was thinking in my head that, something like putting it on the signs in more detail, I'm fine with that, and I think it would at least help. I can't guarantee it'll solve the problem, but,
That, and then relocate it closer down to where it's actually closed, because it does make it look, when they sometimes
Yes,
place it, like there's
correct.
the 2 blocks that in front of it are also closed. So move the location and
There's the
convey that
alley.
the business is open.
Yeah, the alley is,
Yep.
it's open though. That'll be open.
Yeah.
Yeah. Portage Street will be open.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, so any other concerns or questions about the issue? Anyone from the audience?
I do have,
Oh,
I
you
do, I know, I'm sorry, I'm
No, you're
I'm
allowed to.
fussing, but the closure of, so there's nothing on the bridge, but Main Street is closed there just for that one section next to Hometown Bank, and it's closed for safety because people are running across the street. Is this, I guess I'm just looking for the least, the thing that is least disruptive to our downtown businesses. So if people are, we have enough other events downtown that section isn't closed, and we do have a lot of people walking around. The snow day was a perfect example of that. So I guess I'm inclined to, if there aren't any vendors in that space, and it's really just for people to cross the street as like a large crosswalk, I'm not necessarily in favor of that, because I think it can be, and it is disruptive to our, for the same reason that Bentry, they've got the roads closed there. You're going to have the same situation on Main Street, depending on where that road closure sign is. And if it's not vital to your event, having that closed, is it possible to not have that closed just in that section there between, in front of the Loft and Zephyr?
So our request was, we are going to put booths on that, not booths on the bridge, though. We weren't going to put beer breweries or food vendors on the bridge. We're going to keep on the same, similar to the Grill for Good setup that we also host, that we're going to be moving this year, time-ways, farther into the year. But that's the same, similar setup. That's why we've seen it work really well in the Grill for Good setup for traffic flow, that then people also, when they leave the event, they go right into those businesses right there on Franklin as well, and work in that area. And the the businesses that we worked with, we got additional signatures for those folks, an agreement for us to host right there. And we've used Hometown Bank Plaza in the past, but just not the section of street. This would again spread it out a little bit more. The bridge, full bridge closures, because also during Grill for Good, we haven't had it. We've had it end right at the beginning of the bridge, and we've had cars pulling straight up into the event, and then they have to turn around on the bridge. And so it's more of like that traffic flow piece, but also the more we can spread some humans out a little bit more, the less issue we have if we have an emergency and thinking about emergency personnel, or it's a very heavily trafficked event. So there's just general concerns, and that's why we're trying to spread it out to make it so it isn't as much shoulder to shoulder as it is currently.
Have you considered like Erie Street? You've got Dan Smith Park there, or stretch, I mean, if it's shoulder to shoulder, do you need more space?
So if we went all the way down, you mean farther down Water Street?
Just actually on
Running it up and down Erie.
on Erie Street, rather than you know, having one continuous space rather than, I mean, I guess, what is it about specifically, because, you know, what is it specifically about that area? Like, because we've got Dan Smith Park,
Yeah.
we've got a stage there.
Hometown Bank has been very helpful to us in allowing us to put the dumpster behind there. We also bring in a trailer that's a refrigerated trailer to store the beer because it's dropped off the night before, that we also get a donation for the trailer in kind. It's just allowed us to use Hometown Bank because of the bank staff has been so kind to allow us to use it almost as a central headquarters and staging area, and use electricity and use those things in that access point. So that's been the biggest part, is finding a place to put a 53-foot refrigerated trailer and a roll-off dumpster, as well as a ice truck. That's why it's been so central for us for there, is because they provide that space for us, and they've continued to provide that space for us at no cost.
Roger. Any other? Yes, Melissa.
So I just want to be clear, because I appreciate what Gwen's coming from it and bringing an important voice into this conversation. And is there a way for you to utilize just Water Street and keep Main Street open?
We could.
And still have a great event?
We could. I think it's just the congestion and the amount of people that we're having attend anymore. We're at a detriment to our own success at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Where we are, like me trying to move, like, because I help run the event, and trying to run, if I'm trying to get through the crowd at any point, to get from one end to the other is going to take me about 25 minutes to get there,
Mm-hmm.
just because the density of people that we have during that
Mm-hmm.
time frame there.
I guess my other question is also, Chief, do you have any safety concerns if we don't close Main Street? I mean, are you concerned about the foot traffic going across the street?
I don't think it's so much of a concern about the foot traffic. I think we have enough events downtown, with some of the special events we have, and really just the busy times that we see downtown, that we can see people safely cross the street. I don't think it's a safety concern, no.
Okay.
I think that safety could come into play in some of the stuff that he was just talking, that Dennis was talking about, with just the congestion of people. But in terms of crossing the street in and of itself, I don't have safety concerns there.
And just so you know, Dennis, I have worked the craft festival the last 2 years, and I care about it a lot too. But I think balancing, you know, just like Dave was mentioning, making sure that we're balancing this appropriately. Economic times are tough, and we want to make sure that our downtown businesses are well supported, even when we have amazing events downtown.
If I may.
And I know you do too.
Yes, Bridget.
I know, because we had a motion from council to look at this, and the CD department is going to be looking at this for businesses, but Dave and I had a preliminary discussion that we need to maybe revisit where events occur. So some of the locations are spread around. We also do own the South Water Street lot that's in between buildings A, B, C, and D. So, you know, there are other locations. I think sometimes we just stick it. And I think also something that is going to be part of that process is that events maybe need to be limited. Like, if success, great, but we can't just maybe keep expanding it exponentially, that we need to confine it to a certain number of vendors to ensure that, you know, the size is limited. So those are all things we're going to be looking at and coming back to council for.
No, I think you're at good points. I think sometimes success is,
Yeah.
it can be measured differently, not just
Correct.
how much you spread out, but
Correct.
keeping a
Yeah.
quality thing. Any other comments or concerns? Anyone else from the audience? Back to council
Move to approve with the emergency.
with the emergency.
Second.
Second, any comment there, Mike? No. Jeff, any comment?
We don't need to make any special mention of putting the businesses specifically on the sign. That's just something we can do.
We'll do that administratively, yeah.
All right.
Okay, seeing any other comments? Gwen? No? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Thank you.
Mr. Bowling, haven't seen you in a while. I knew you were coming.
Jim and I have been talking about this one for years, so this is like it may not seem like much to you, but he was like dancing in the office when he kind of got this to this point, and I am too, both as a city manager and a cyclist, because this is really going to open up kind of a whole new corridor. And when we talk about, sort of access for neighborhoods and, kind of the strategic locations where you'd put a trail, frankly, this lines up really well with like a lot of the schools. So anyways, I'll let Jim talk about it, but it's good news.
Thanks, Dave. Yes, may not seem this way, but this is really exciting. Okay, go back to 2003, 2004, the bicentennial plan, long before I came here. There was the plan is full of discussions of improved pedestrian orientation, wanting walking pathways to key destinations. That got carried through to the bike master plan. It's all about, being able to walk out your door or bike out your driveway instead of putting the bike on the back of the car, drive to a parking lot, and then experience it. All the way up to the climate action plan. This trail is part of the climate action plan as well that was just approved. So for a little more background, for those who don't know, the city of Akron's water supply to their residents starts to the north of us at Lake Rockwell, and the water lines run through Kent. And that leaves this open corridor where no developments over top it, no structures, no buildings or anything like that, like you see along old rail corridors or utility corridors overhead. So we started talking with Akron, it was a decade ago, to get permission to allow us to put a trail, a path, a walkway through their right-of-way. Their right-of-ways over 150 feet wide in locations. The real beauty of it is if you look on the figure that this trail, this path, goes through several neighborhoods just west of the Cuyahoga River and go by, Davie Elementary School, Longcoy School, Stanton Middle School, the high school. It'll connect to bike trails on both ends. And this facility's a little different. It's not a trail, recreation trail, okay? In some areas it's going to look like that, but in other areas it's going to look like a wider sidewalk through and next to roadway. So just looking a little more in depth at it, starting at the south, it connects to the Freedom Trail and the Portage at Middlebury. The white dotted lines there is the project that Portage County, Summit County Metro Parks is doing with us. Should start this year. You can see it'll go along Akron Boulevard. Adjacent to Akron Boulevard, go by Longcoy School, get to Main Street in the area that we worked with Claiborne 3 years ago to put the walkway on Main Street. Now, it's going to be really important to have a good crossing here. We understand that. We'll work through that. Then it will the bike lanes and the sidewalks along West Main will be used, and then we'll go along Majors Lane, go next to Jesse Smith Nature Preserve, have access to Davie Elementary School, the Fairchild Fields, and then go back through another open area, get to Stanton Middle School, the high school campus. I mean, we've talked to the school district about this. They're excited to see a pedestrian path go through their campus and connect up their facilities. And then the trail would then extend along 43. We're working on this right now with the 43 project up at North Manaway with Davie and the schools. It will then go through Davie's new seed campus. If you actually look online to their video, it shows this on it, and then would connect all the way up to a future trail that Portage Parks and Chris Craycroft are working on right now to connect Hudson Judson to Towner's Woods through there. And all these pieces are weaving together. And none of this needs a parking lot that you have to drive to, okay? If you live in those areas, you can go out and you can use that. So just give you a little bit, like some of the key areas, what it would look like. This is Akron Boulevard. You can see the trail. It's an open space that no one's using right now. Longcoy area, again, that open treat area. Sorry.
They weren't there and now they are.
Yeah, wait for this one now. So here, this is like these areas where we cross major roads, and this one Fairchild and Majors Lane. We need to do something well to make it so that drivers slow down and pedestrians can cross the street. And Jack, I promised to your neighbor that we would move it as close to the road as possible.
Thank you.
And that's the intent. So like in Majors Lane, there's a wide front lawn because the Akron's water line's here, but the people really need to be closer to the road to cross the street to get to Davie Elementary and those kind of things. So none of this is designed right now. The first step was to get permission, and this agreement would give us permission with Akron. Basically, they would give us permission to put a trail path over their water line easements, and the trade-off would be that we would mow the areas that we build the trail in. So that saves them money, which we'd have to do if we got a full easement anyways.
So you're going to mow my front yard?
Yes. It may not be your desired, you know.
I heard that promise, Jack.
So we're requesting approval to execute the agreement that we provided with the City of Akron for this trail.
Thank you, Mr. Bowling. Any questions for Jim?
That sounds great.
Yes, go ahead.
I don't have a question, but I think this is outstanding. I think that this really sounds like it's going to connect our communities, particularly in the Middlebury, that area there, all the way up through. It connects the elementary, middle school, and high school. It's outstanding. Well done.
Thank you.
Very exciting.
Melissa?
Yes, I want to second that too, because to move our students from the neighborhood that I live in Ward 1, where Gwen lives too, away from the intersection of Woodard and Fairchild to here, and to slow down the traffic where there is a pretty good sight distance, as opposed to up at the crest of the hill where we all know catastrophic things happen, makes me really happy. But I'm concerned about what kind of pushback you're going to get from some of the homeowners on some of these where you're actually going to have to purchase property. Do you already have a sense that that's going to be an issue?
So, yes, we have a sense that wherever this is built near to a home that doesn't have one, that doesn't have the sidewalk there right now, they're going to have questions. And I think it's just the nature of something new near your home. We don't need to purchase property because all this land is owned by the City of Akron.
Okay. I misunderstood something in the materials then.
Sure.
Oh, that's the next one. I'm sorry.
That's the next one, yes. That's
Okay.
the next item.
Sorry.
So, yeah. So
My bad.
No.
You get those for the first 6 months.
Thank you.
To answer this more, the question of, we will deal with, in each section that we start, we will meet with the homeowners, whether it's in a public meeting or individually, to talk about how we can soften any potential impacts, okay? Landscaping, shrubbery, those kind of things. But in the end, most of the areas where it's actually near a home, because most of it's like Longcoy, there's no homes in there, okay? Majors Lane and Akron Boulevard, it's more like a sidewalk being built, and we would build that sidewalk near the road.
Thank you.
Yes, Mike.
You're going to mow that whole pipeline, the city is?
Only when we build the trail.
Okay, I mean, not just where the trail is, but the whole entire thing?
The whole width, that's correct.
You'd be hiring? That's a long, the park's already mowed portions
Exactly,
of it.
that's
yeah.
exactly right. And we're working with Parks to try to find a way to make that happen, and we've got several years to do it. Well, we're excited about this right now because it's a big step the way we see it. Unfortunately, people won't see anything built for a while, because the next step then would be to do the planning, get the funding for it, because we would be looking at grants to fund this, and then bite it off a piece at a time, so.
Very good.
Other questions from
I
council?
know I will.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor.
You said the key word, grant money. That's where this is coming from?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
So the taxpayers that can aren't going to be paying anything for it.
Well,
Well,
the grants, whether it's Safe Routes to School or Transportation Alternative Set Aside, they'll pay 80%. So it would be the 20% like we would if we built a sidewalk along the roadways.
so that's going to be a regulation sidewalk. It's not going to be an asphalt pad or something.
We haven't decided that yet.
All right.
Yeah, if you go by Horning Road, before we get into the township, it was built in 2008.
Very good, yeah.
It's a asphalt path next to the road that looks like a sidewalk. Or you go outside this building, we built it in concrete.
Yeah.
It really depends on the location and the situation. A lot will probably depend on Akron and what they accept and how deep their water line and how close we are to it. It'd be easier building concrete over that versus vibrating asphalt over top of 36-inch water line. So those are all to be determined as we move forward. Did I answer your question, Mayor?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else? Yes, Heidi.
Yeah, I guess this is exciting. I'm not really understanding where the Parks District trail is going to come in. Is it going to actually take people to Lake Rockwell? Or
Towners Woods.
Towners, this is an existing trail that goes by Towners.
Let me see.
I'm just wondering
Sure.
if this is going to be able to tie in like the Twin Lakes area somehow, or...
Okay, so, sorry I don't have a bigger picture, but where this would end, this is near Lake Rockwell and the water plant that Akron owns. Towners Woods would be to the east along the dash line. And over here is the existing trail that's at Hudson and Judson Road. So as far as Twin Lakes goes, up 43, no, that's, we're only going just a little bit past the Davies property. So.
Okay,
Mike?
thanks.
Oh, that's that diagonal road coming out of there, isn't it? Right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, so right the diagonal road,
Right here.
Okay.
the old railroad bed.
So who actually is going to own this pathway, ownership-wise? The city, Akron, or who?
So the way the agreement's written, it's ours to own and maintain the pathway. If they have to do work, they will put it back into a reasonable condition if they're working on their water lines. But if it's to maintain the trail, that would be us.
I was just wondering, historically, this time of year, we all worry about who has to shovel the sidewalks. So it's going to be the city's responsibility to keep them?
Well, okay, sorry, I was thinking of certain areas. If it's, okay, forgive me, I'm going to use Councilman Amrine's area. It's going to be like a sidewalk, which would fall under a code in the frontage that the property owner would be responsible to shovel that.
I got a snow blower, Jack, you can have it.
So,
Get your snow blower.
each section's
Got a
going to...
no vote from you.
Each section's going to be a little bit different, depending upon who the adjacent property owners are. So, or if there's even adjacent property. Like in some areas, we're going by the Fairchild Fields, that would be us to maintain and plow.
Because the park owns that.
Correct. Yeah. And then there's some areas it's going through where it's not the frontage along a road either. So the nice thing about this is it'll be at least 8 foot wide to where a truck can go down and plow it easier.
Just curious.
Okay. Any other questions? Anyone from the audience that's left? No.
And the existing.
Yes,
I had a
Chris?
question. Since we're still in the planning phase, is there a way to seek additional funding so that the plowing is not dependent on a homeowner?
Federal grant funds or grant funds there's not funding for maintenance for that level of type of things. So, but we can work with the parks to see what can be done.
Ordinarily, I mean, as a user of the bike trails in the winter, most Summit County, Portage, it's not plowed.
Yep.
I mean, so the expectation for the hike and bike trail is not typically plowed. I think where it gets unique is Jim's point, like along Major's Lane, and I guess we'll have to think about that. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Do I hear a motion from City Council?
I move to approve.
Second.
Any other comments?
I already said it before, but it bears repeating that this touches communities in Kent that don't already have access to a hike and bike. I think access or a proximity to a hike and bike, I believe, increases property values. It's the kind of thing people list about where they want to live. I think it's a huge asset. I understand that change is scary and bad, but I think that in the long run, when this is finished, it's really going to be a remarkable way to travel in the community safely on a bicycle, non-motorized, walking, jogging. I think it's a tremendous asset. It shows some real creative thinking, and remarkable that there's grant money available to do it. So thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
You can't say non-motorized because now they have the e-bikes.
E-bikes.
Is it e-bike motorized?
You better believe it.
Well, maybe we should get a sign. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Horses, donkeys, all of it. It's all welcome.
Seeing no other comments, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I do want to say something. I just want to say that when we started down this path, so to speak, of hike and bike trails, we talked about access to those trails and how the access was one of our big concerns, because you have to go over some pretty rough roads, sharing roads with cars going fast, etc., to get to trails. So this is part of that internal network that will help people access the trails much more safely, as Gwen was saying. I think it's just phenomenal, and this is really the way to go. Thank you, Jim.
Okay. Any other comments?
One more. And
yes, Chris.
I think on the point of access, I think it bears repeating that some people can't use non-motorized transport, and so not leaving, just making sure that as best as possible, especially if these are commuter trails, right? Not recreational trails, that we think of them differently than bike and hike, that we think of snow plowing and clearing and maintenance in a way that these are transport networks for people.
Okay.
But thank you so much. This is just amazing.
All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign.
Thank you.
Well, let me just say, Jim, for 13 years I dealt with the City of Akron waterway through the campus at Roosevelt. It was never pretty. So congratulations that you got this far. All right, we have a second one from you, the East Main Street Project right-of-way acquisitions. You're up, Melissa. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I'm just kidding.
He already answered my question.
Oh, there you go. Yes, Jim.
So, the East Main Street project is in the last phases before construction starts in 2025. And so we're currently in the phase where we obtain the rights to build the roadway in the way that best fits the community. So thanks to Kent State, most of this impact is on Kent State property. We're actually moving the road south and putting things on Kent State. So even though that's the case, there are a lot of areas where we're going to grade into and smooth out and need to be on people's property to do that. So whenever we get federal money to do a project, we're required to follow the Uniform Relocation Act, which it basically attempts to be fair to all parties. So the negotiations that happens, the appraisals that are done, the fair market value estimate that's set, we are not trained to be able to do that ourselves. We have to hire out people and consultants to do an appraisal, and then to do a review of the appraisal, and then that establishes the fair market value, and then trained negotiators go out and meet with the residents and talk to them about that. So there's 32 properties that we'll need to get rights to. 20 of them are just for temporary onlys. One's Kent State. And the other 11 have small permanent takes in it, usually where at the corner of a road, of an intersection, we need to widen a little bit out, and maybe not widen is not the right term. The way the existing right-of-way was set is very tight, so to move the sidewalk away from the roadway, it goes off onto the property. So what we're requesting approval for is, first is we have two property owners who have agreed to the fair market value, so we're asking for approval for those. And then secondly, we're asking for approval for any future ones that agree to the fair market value to send those through just straight to council instead of going through a committee session, since they would be following the fair market value.
Okay. So there's basically two things you're asking for. Okay. Yes, Mike.
That's sort of like we've done on the other projects.
Just like we did on Summit Street, and just like we did on the Fairchild Bridge.
Okay. Heidi? Oh, I thought your hand went up.
No.
Okay. Anyone else have any questions or? All right, so can I have a motion? We can have a motion for both of these collectively in one motion. So do I have anyone want to
I would move.
Both
Second.
motions.
With the
Second.
emergency.
With the emergency.
It says right here.
Second.
Okay. Any other comments?
I do have a comment.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I am so excited about this project. It's actually starting to take shape visually, to us at least. And we know that this can be quite time-consuming, this process, and even on councils. It can be quite time-consuming with all the roll calls and, all the approvals for this. But this is going to transform Main Street, and it's been a long time in the making, and it still will continue to be, but this is great to go down this path, so thank you.
Other comments? I might add that I can't wait to put these up on my wall, because as I get the phone calls, I can at least look at it and say, well. Hearing no other comments, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Okay, there you go, Mr. Mayor.
Finance Committee, Mr. DeLeon.
Portage County Land Bank. Where are we going? That's Bridget. Okay.
So this is pretty much a housekeeping issue. The Portage County Land Bank basically is getting access to demolition money through the Ohio Department of Development. The city benefited from similar demolition money 2 years ago, where we got $331,000 for the cleanup activity I'm doing over at the Triangle Cleaners. So this is similar. This is basically to address blighted properties. For those of you that are not aware, land banks can basically tax foreclose on properties that have delinquencies, but they also do revitalization of blighted properties. The City of Kent has 2 properties that we are going to submit to the land bank for demolition of funding. One is a residential. It's 331 Elm Street. For those of you that are new to council, while we seek the funding, we do not demolish without getting a court order. So that way then all of due process is provided to the owner. Typically when we are bringing a residential house that has been left in this condition, it is usually with an estate that's insolvent and relatives or owners that are not in the community. So I did want to make sure that that is clear. We're not going to just take a house down without moving through everything legally. The other property is owned by the city. It is 266 North Water. We have been trying to market 3 properties over there for more than 4 years. 2 of the properties have sold, 252 North Water and the vacant lot. It is going to be submitted, be turned into an Italian restaurant. We actually just received the Planning Commission application, which is one of the ones we went through. It had to go back, but it's going to look great. So the property, though, at 266 did not have anyone interested. Everyone that's gone through it has found it to be structurally unsound. So because there's this opportunity to seek this demolition money, I, of course, contacted the land bank. Dan used to work for us, by the way, so that helps. But they were looking for commercial projects. Estimates, rough estimates on this is anywhere between $75,000 and $100,000 for the demolition. So being able to pay for it this way is appropriate. I am seeking authority or approval tonight for submission to the land bank of both of these properties, and also on the 266 North Water to enter into a subrecipient agreement. That means that the Community Development Department will be managing the demolition. Dan has a lot on his plate, and he knows that we have the capacity and ability to do that because I've done it with him on other stuff. So that's what I'm here for, and I can answer any questions.
Questions? Roger? No, nobody? Anybody in the audience? Back to council.
Urban development to me.
What's that?
I said it sounds like urban development to me.
Move to approve with
Thank you, Mr.
emergency.
Mayor.
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Rhonda.
Rhonda.
Oh, gotta go last.
Poor Rhonda.
So I'm here to ask
Motion
council
approved.
He can't do that.
Out of order.
He can't do that. He's already talked during the last.
Yeah,
meeting.
he's
not allowed.
having fun tonight.
Okay.
So I'm just here to request the approval of a amendment to our 2024 budget. This is the first amendment of the year. Majority of this, for those of you that are new, this reappropriations are from last year's projects where money was set aside last year. It wasn't included in the 2024 budget, so we're moving that money towards this year for those projects.
Questions? Anybody from the audience? Back to council.
Move to approve
Second.
with the emergency.
It's automatic, isn't it?
Thank
Right,
you.
automatic, yeah.
Okay, any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
We're done for the evening. Thank you.
All right.
All right, you survived your second one. 2 down. Hard issues when you get